The greatest revenge story ever told. Imagine having everything: a career, a fortune waiting for you, the woman you love, and a future that seems almost perfect. Then, three men decide you're too lucky. They don't kill you. They don't even give you a trial. They simply send you to prison and let the world believe you've disappeared. You're 19 years old. You expect to be there for a few days. Instead, you spend 14 years underground. And when you finally escape, you discover something extraordinary. The men who destroyed your life are still alive. They are wealthy. They are powerful. They have families. They have reputations. They've forgotten you completely. But you haven't forgotten them. And now, you have something they never expected: time. This is the story of Edmond Dantès, the man who became the Count of Monte Cristo, and the greatest revenge story ever told. Before Edmond Dantès became a legend, he was almost painfully ordinary. He was 19, a young sailor aboard the Pharaon. He had just returned to Marseille after a dangerous voyage, and everything seemed to be going his way. His captain was dead, but Edmond had performed so well. He was about to become captain himself. He was engaged to the woman he loved. His father was waiting for him at home. For the first time in his life, Edmond could see the future, and it looked perfect. That's when three men decided to destroy it. Three enemies. The first was Danglars. He worked aboard the ship, and he wanted the captaincy Edmond was about to receive. The second was Fernand. He loved Mercédès, but Mercédès loved Edmond. The third was Château. He knew what the others were doing, and chose not to stop them. None of them needed Edmond dead. They only needed him gone. So they created a letter, a lie. They accused Edmond of being a Bonapartist conspirator, and they anonymously sent the accusation to the authorities. Edmond had no idea what was coming. Then, on the very day he is supposed to celebrate his engagement, the police arrive. Edmond is arrested. He doesn't understand. He hasn't committed a crime. He believes the truth will save him. That's the first tragedy. He trusts the world to be fair. He assumes someone will listen. Someone will investigate. Someone will realize he's innocent. But one powerful man has a reason to keep him silent. The deputy crown prosecutor, Gérard de Villefort. Because the letter contains a secret that could destroy Villefort's own father. So Villefort makes a choice. He knows Edmond is innocent, and he sends him to prison anyway. Not for days, not for months, forever. Edmond is taken to the Château d'If, a fortress prison surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea. The doors close. The footsteps disappear. And suddenly, the world moves on without him. Mercédès believes he's dead. His father slowly falls into poverty. The men who betrayed him continue living their lives. And Edmond, he waits 1 year, 2, 5, 10, 14. And then, someone starts digging through his prison wall. Edmond doesn't know it yet. But the man on the other side of that wall is about to change his entire life. And before he arrives, Edmond Dantès will have to decide whether he wants to remain an innocent man or become something far more dangerous. The Count of Monte Cristo. The Château d'If wasn't designed to rehabilitate prisoners. It was designed to make them disappear. Edmond Dantès is thrown into a cell with no idea how long he'll remain there. At first, he expects someone to come, a judge, a lawyer, anyone. But days become weeks. Weeks become months, and eventually, Edmond realizes something terrifying. Nobody is coming. The world has moved on without him. Edmond begins to break. He screams. He bargains, he prays. He even considers taking his own life. Because prison isn't only taking away his freedom. It's taking away his identity. The young sailor who once dreamed of becoming a captain is slowly disappearing. And then, one day, Edmond hears something. From behind the wall, someone is digging. Edmond eventually meets another prisoner, Abbé Faria, an elderly Italian priest and scholar who has spent years attempting to tunnel out of the fortress. At first, Faria seems almost impossible. He speaks multiple languages. He understands history, science, mathematics, philosophy. He can teach Edmond everything the prison took away from him. And Edmond realizes something. His imprisonment has given him something he never had before, time. So Faria becomes his teacher. Day after day, Edmond learns languages, economics, history, politics, philosophy, strategy. The naive young sailor begins disappearing. A new Edmond is being built. But Faria doesn't only teach Edmond. He listens. He asks questions. And eventually, he reconstructs what happened on the day Edmond was arrested. The anonymous letter, Danglars, Fernand, Cadraus, Villefort. Piece by piece, the truth emerges. Edmond wasn't imprisoned because of some terrible mistake. He was betrayed, deliberately, by people he trusted. And the cruelest part, one of them wanted his position. One wanted the woman he loved. And one powerful man sacrificed Edmond to protect his own family. Edmond finally understands. His 14 years in prison weren't an accident. They were the result of a choice. Someone chose to destroy his life. Then Faria tells Edmond something even more extraordinary. Years earlier, Faria had learned of a legendary treasure belonging to the Spada family. A fortune hidden on the island of Monte Cristo, gold, jewels, millions in wealth. And Faria knows where it is. For years, Edmond has dreamed of escape. Now he has something far more dangerous. Knowledge. He knows who betrayed him. He knows why. And if he escapes, he'll have the resources to find them. But Faria gives Edmond one final lesson. Money alone isn't enough. If Edmond wants revenge, he must become someone his enemies will never recognize. Someone powerful enough to enter their world, without them ever realizing who is standing in front of them. Then, everything changes. Faria suffers a fatal attack. Edmond watches his teacher die. And suddenly, the man who gave him hope is gone. But Faria leaves him one final gift. The location of the treasure. Music rises. Edmond has lost his teacher. But he has gained a purpose. He knows where the fortune is. He knows who destroyed him. And for the first time in 14 years, he can see a way out. Faria's death creates an opportunity. Edmond takes the place of his teacher's body. The guards sew him into a burial sack, believing they are preparing to dispose of a dead prisoner. But Edmond is alive. The sack is thrown into the sea. Then he cuts himself free. He surfaces. The fortress disappears behind him. 14 years of imprisonment finally end. Edmond Dantès is free. But the world believes he is dead. And that is exactly what Edmond needs. Edmond finds the island of Monte Cristo, and buried beneath it is the treasure Feria promised him: gold, jewels, an unimaginable fortune. Suddenly, the powerless prisoner has become one of the richest men in Europe. But here's the crucial moment. Edmond doesn't simply become wealthy. He becomes someone else. He creates identities. He changes his appearance. He learns how aristocrats speak. He studies his enemies. He enters their world. And eventually, a mysterious, impossibly wealthy man arrives in Paris. Nobody knows where he came from. Nobody knows how he acquired his fortune. Nobody knows his real name. They call him the Count, and then the Count meets the men who destroyed Edmond Dantès. They don't recognize him. Danglars doesn't recognize him. Fernand doesn't recognize him. Villefort doesn't recognize him. They see only a wealthy stranger, a mysterious aristocrat, a man who seems to know everything and fear nothing. But the Count knows exactly who they are. He remembers every face, every lie, every decision, every year he spent behind a prison wall. And now, he has something none of them ever imagined possible: the power to destroy them. But revenge is about to become more complicated than Edmond expected, because destroying his enemies means entering the lives of innocent people too. And once the Count begins pulling the first thread, he discovers something terrifying. A revenge plot can destroy far more than the people who deserve it. Count of Monte Cristo. Paris has forgotten Edmond Dantès. 14 years have passed. The young sailor who disappeared into the Château d'If is nothing more than a memory. But now, Paris is fascinated by a mysterious new aristocrat. He is impossibly wealthy. He appears to know everyone. He buys estates without hesitation. He speaks several languages. And somehow, he always seems to know exactly what people are hiding. Nobody understands where the Count of Monte Cristo came from. But the Count knows exactly where they came from. The first target is Danglars, the man who wanted Edmond's position. Now Danglars is wealthy, a respected banker, a powerful man. He has everything Edmond once dreamed of. But the Count doesn't attack him directly. That would be too easy. Instead, he attacks the thing Danglars values most: his money. The Count begins manipulating financial information. He creates uncertainty. Rumors spread. Investments collapse. Fortunes disappear. Danglars watches millions slip through his fingers, and he has no idea why. That's the genius of the Count's revenge. He isn't simply hurting his enemies. He's making them experience the same helplessness he experienced in prison. Then comes Fernand. Years ago, Fernand wanted Mercédès, but she chose Edmond. When Edmond disappeared, Fernand eventually married her. He built a new life. He became wealthy, powerful, and eventually a respected military figure. To everyone in Paris, Fernand is a success story. Except the Count knows the truth. Fernand's reputation was built on betrayal. So the Count doesn't invent a crime. He simply uncovers what Fernand tried to bury: old secrets, old decisions, old evidence. The perfect image begins to crack. Then comes one of the most fascinating scenes in the novel. The Count is invited into the very social circles of the people he intends to destroy. He sits at their tables, drinks their wine, meets their families, listens to their conversations, and they have absolutely no idea that the man sitting across from them is the prisoner they believed was dead. Imagine the psychological power of that moment. Edmond spent 14 years dreaming of this. Now it's happening. But something unexpected occurs. He sees Mercédès, the woman he once loved. She recognizes something familiar in him. Not his face. Something deeper, a voice, a gesture, a memory. And for a moment, the Count's carefully constructed identity begins to crack. Because revenge is easier when the past is dead. But Mercédès is alive, and she remembers Edmond. This is where the story becomes much darker. Edmond believes he is delivering justice, but revenge doesn't remain neatly contained. When you destroy one person, you affect everyone connected to them. Their children, their spouses, their friends, their servants. People who had nothing to do with Edmond's imprisonment begin suffering because of his plan. And now Edmond faces a problem he never imagined in prison. What if his revenge hurts innocent people? For 14 years, he imagined himself as the victim. Now, he has become the person controlling everyone else's fate. There's something important happening beneath the revenge. Edmond Dantès is disappearing. The Count of Monte Cristo is becoming real. He no longer behaves like the young sailor who loved Mercédès. He rarely speaks about his old life. He doesn't think like Edmond anymore. He thinks like someone who believes he has the power to decide who deserves to live comfortably and who deserves to suffer. And that's when the novel asks its most dangerous question. Who gave Edmond the right to become judge and executioner? At first, the answer seems obvious. His enemies deserve punishment. But then the consequences spread, and the Count realizes something terrifying. He can control people's lives, but he cannot control the consequences of his own actions. For years, Edmond has believed his revenge is almost perfect. Every move has been calculated, every identity carefully constructed, every enemy slowly pushed toward destruction. But there's one thing Edmond didn't calculate. Human suffering doesn't follow a plan. A financial collapse doesn't only hurt the banker. A ruined reputation doesn't only hurt the guilty. A family can fall apart because of one person's sins. And suddenly, the Count's revenge begins producing something he never intended. Not justice, collateral damage. Edmond has finally achieved what he wanted. His enemies are suffering. Their fortunes are disappearing. Their reputations are collapsing. Their perfect lives are breaking apart. So why doesn't he feel free? Because revenge has a strange promise. It tells you when they suffer as you suffered, you'll finally be whole again. But Edmond discovers the truth. Pain doesn't work that way. Destroying the people who hurt you doesn't give you back the 14 years they stole. It doesn't restore his father. It doesn't restore his youth. It doesn't restore the woman he loved. And it doesn't turn back time. For the first time, the Count begins to question his own mission. Edmond Dantès spent 14 years dreaming of revenge. He believed money could buy justice. He believed intelligence could control fate. He believed he could punish the guilty without becoming guilty himself. But now, his revenge is beginning to destroy innocent lives. And Edmond must confront the question he has avoided since the day he escaped. If revenge changes you into the person you once hated, did you really win? Edmond Dantès spent 14 years in prison dreaming about this moment. His enemies are falling. Their fortunes are collapsing. Their reputations are being destroyed. And yet, Edmond isn't celebrating, because something has gone terribly wrong. The Count believed revenge would be simple. Find the guilty, punish them, walk away. But human lives aren't simple. Every enemy has a family. Every decision has consequences. And every act of revenge creates another victim. The Count begins to realize that he isn't simply destroying the people who betrayed him. He's pulling entire families into the wreckage. And for the first time, he feels something he hasn't allowed himself to feel in years: doubt. The Count has spent years believing he understands justice. He has convinced himself that fate chose him for this purpose. But now he sees the flaw. He isn't God. He doesn't know everything. He cannot see every consequence. And perhaps most importantly, he cannot decide who deserves to suffer. That realization changes the story completely. Because the greatest enemy Edmond faces is no longer Danglars, or Fernand, or Villefort. It's Edmond Dantès himself. And then there is Mercédès, the woman Edmond loved before the prison. She has built a life without him. She has a son, a family, a history. She eventually realizes who the Count really is. Edmond expects hatred. Instead, he encounters something much more painful: understanding. Mercédès reminds him of the man he used to be. The young sailor. The man who believed in love. The man who trusted people. The man who hadn't yet been consumed by revenge. And suddenly, Edmond sees the distance between himself and that young man. 14 years ago, he wanted his life back. Now, Edmond finally understands something prison couldn't teach him. Revenge can punish the past, but it cannot restore it. No fortune can give him back 14 years. No enemy's suffering can resurrect his father. No victory can make him 19 again. And no amount of power can undo what has already happened. The Count has won, and yet he has lost something: himself. This is why the Count of Monte Cristo is much more than a revenge story. At first, we want Edmond to destroy his enemies. We cheer when the powerful begin to fall, because we understand his anger. We understand his pain. We want justice for him. But Alexandre Dumas takes us somewhere much more uncomfortable. He asks, what happens when justice becomes revenge? And then, what happens when revenge becomes an obsession? The story refuses to give us an easy answer. Because Edmond is both victim and eventually judge. Remember the young man at the beginning. Edmond Dantès had everything: love, a career, a father, a future. Then 14 years disappeared. He escaped with nothing except knowledge of a treasure. That treasure gave him wealth. His wealth gave him power. His power gave him revenge. But none of those things gave him what he actually wanted: his old life. And perhaps that's the cruelest truth in the entire novel. Sometimes, the thing we spend our entire lives trying to recover is already gone. The young Edmond wanted justice. The Count wanted revenge. But eventually, he begins to understand mercy. Not because his enemies deserve it, but because he finally understands that suffering has no natural stopping point. One act creates another. One wound creates another wound. Someone has to decide when it ends, and that person has to be the one holding the power. Imagine the Mediterranean Sea, the same sea that surrounded Edmond's prison. The same sea he crossed when he escaped. The same sea that carried him toward his new identity. For years, it represented imprisonment, then freedom. And finally, something else. A reminder that life keeps moving. The past cannot be changed, but the future can. Edmond Dantès loses 14 years. He loses the woman he once loved. He loses the innocence of his youth. But eventually, he learns the one lesson revenge could never teach him. You cannot undo the past. You can only decide what you become because of it. That's why the Count of Monte Cristo has survived for nearly 2 centuries. Because beneath the disguises, the treasure, the conspiracies, and the revenge is a question that belongs to all of us. What would you do if someone destroyed your life? Would you forgive them? Would you seek justice? Or would you spend everything you had, making them suffer? Edmond Dantès chose revenge. And for a while, it made him feel powerful. But eventually, he discovered something more important than revenge: freedom. Not freedom from prison. Freedom from the past. Pause. Because sometimes, the greatest victory isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's becoming someone they can no longer control. End narrator. If you enjoyed this journey through the Count of Monte Cristo, subscribe for more cinematic stories behind the world's greatest books. And tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Edmond's enemies? Or would you have done exactly what he did? He barely recognizes the person who wanted it.